all will be covered today in China Undercover. You find our information helpful? Please subscribe and turn on the notification. It will help us get more motivation to produce more quality videos. Now back to the news. On the afternoon of August 24, 2023, a surge in panic buying of salt gripped China. This frenzy was triggered by concerns over Japan's plan to release treated wastewater from the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant into the Pacific Ocean. While Japanese authorities appeared calm about the situation, Chinese citizens grew anxious, leading to a rush on salt supplies. The fear stemmed from the belief that Japan was discharging untreated nuclear wastewater directly into the sea, sparking outrage and anti-Japanese sentiments among the Chinese public. In the span of just an hour, a truck delivered 4 tons of salt to a location, and it quickly vanished as Chinese consumers engaged in a frenzy of salt buying. The salt rush was triggered by concerns about Japan's decision to release treated nuclear wastewater into the Pacific Ocean from the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant. Critics questioned the necessity of this salt stockpiling, given that Japan's wastewater discharge plan spans 30 years. Reports indicate that 300 pieces, each containing 40 bags of 500 grams of salt, were sold out within just 10 minutes. This buying spree reflects the prevailing fear and uncertainty among the Chinese population regarding Japan's nuclear wastewater discharge. On August 24, 2023, Japan started releasing treated nuclear wastewater from the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant into the Pacific Ocean. This caused concern in China. China's Customs Administration responded by stopping all imports of Japanese fish and shellfish. Chinese media also talked about potential health problems caused by Japan's nuclear wastewater. This made many Chinese people believe that Japan was putting untreated nuclear wastewater directly into the sea, which led to panic and a rush to buy salt that lasted for days. This issue became a hot topic on China's social media platforms like Xi'an, Weibo, and Baidu, and it increased anti-Japanese feelings among the Chinese people. Long live the Chinese People's Liberation Army down with Japan. Chinese customs authorities swiftly responded by announcing a complete suspension of all imports of Japanese fish and shellfish. Official Chinese media played up the potential health risks associated with Japan's nuclear wastewater, exacerbating the panic buying of salt. This panic persisted for several days, dominating discussions on Chinese social media platforms. Meanwhile, on the streets of China, anti-Japanese sentiment flared, with protesters expressing their displeasure by chanting slogans and targeting Japanese vehicles. This sentiment was fueled by the Chinese government's efforts to stoke nationalist fervor among its citizens. Some Japanese are thrown stones on the street. Protesters refer to Chinese citizens who have been influenced or brainwashed to mistakenly support the Chinese Communist Party (TTM) in the name of loving their country. They chanted phrases like "Down with Japan" repeatedly. In a separate incident, a Chinese netizen asked, "Should I go? I am calling to inquire why nuclear wastewater is being discharged into the sea." Can you speak English? The person was questioning why Japan was releasing nuclear wastewater into the ocean, expressing their concern about the environmental impact. As the situation unfolded, individuals made inquiries and expressed concerns about the discharge of nuclear wastewater into the sea, reflecting the widespread unease and misinformation surrounding the issue. The official Weibo account of the Japanese embassy in China reported that innocent individuals and organizations in Japan have been receiving harassing calls from China. The embassy warned that these actions constitute criminal behavior. They emphasized that if the harassment targets businesses, it could lead to economic losses, and if it affects emergency medical organizations, it might put lives at risk. In response to the situation, a media outlet called New Beijing News, which is under the propaganda department of the Beijing Municipal Party Committee, conducted an opinion poll. They asked whether people would still eat Japanese food. Several other media outlets followed up with similar surveys. In an online poll conducted by Red Star News, out of 116,000 respondents, 107,000 replied that they would no longer eat Japanese food. Regarding the Fukushima wastewater discharge, It's essential to note that this is not the primary wastewater directly from the reactors. Instead, it involves the cooling water that has been in storage tanks for over 10 years. This water has undergone a complex process of sedimentation and filtration. International agencies recognize it as meeting the standard for secondary cooling water that can be safely discharged. It's a concentration of tritium, a radioactive substance. After this filtration process is 1/50th of the tritium concentration found in Japan's drinking water. It's also important to mention that this discharge will not happen all at once. It is planned to occur over a span of 30 years, with the earliest stored wastewater being released first, and the most recently stored wastewater being discharged 30 years from now. Throughout this process, international organizations like the International Atomic Energy Agency and environmental agencies from various countries will monitor its impact on the environment. When people think about radioactive materials, they often recall instances like the atomic bomb explosions and the Chernobyl nuclear disaster. These situations involve radioactive contamination caused by substances like uranium and plutonium, which are metallic radioactive elements. However, the radioactive material found in the wastewater of the Fukushima nuclear power plant is primarily tritium, a type of superheavy hydrogen. Tritium exists in a radioactive form as water molecules. In comparison to other radioactive substances, it's less harmful. It can be protected against with a layer of plastic protective clothing, unlike metallic radioactive elements that can accumulate in living organisms through absorption by ocean algae. Tritium doesn't work that way. It gets absorbed by fish when they consume it, and then enters the bodies of humans when they consume the contaminated fish. This means the contamination primarily travels through the food chain. Wastewater from Fukushima won't lead to widespread contamination. Instead, it will be continuously diluted in the ocean. The practice of discharging such wastewater into the ocean has also been successfully carried out by the French nuclear industry, which released significant amounts of wastewater containing tritium into the English Channel. In Japan, existing processes have been effective in filtering out 62 different types of radioactive substances. However, tritium cannot be completely filtered out, and the only disposal method for it is through discharge into the ocean. On August 25th, test results for tritium levels in seawater around the Fukushima plant were released. They indicated that at 10 sampling points located 3 kilometers from the plant, the tritium content was below 10 becquerels per liter. This level is much lower than the expected upper limit of 1,500 becquerels per liter. The mass anti-Japanese movement, orchestrated by the Chinese Communist Party, has raised questions about its direct consequences. An economist at the Nomura Research Institute in Tokyo mentioned that Japan's seafood exports to China and Hong Kong only constituted 0.17% of Japan's total exports in 2022. Even if the import suspension lasts for a year, the impact on Japan's GDP or gross domestic product would be minimal, around 0.3%. Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida on August 24th requested China to immediately lift its ban on aquatic product imports and suggested a science-based discussion on the wastewater release's impact. If seafood becomes inedible due to the discharge of nuclear wastewater from Japan, it would severely affect seawater farming and the consumption of aquatic products. This would deal a significant blow to China's fisheries industry. Dawn, released by China's Administration of Fisheries and the Fishery Administration of the Ministry of Rural Affairs in June 2023 showed that the total economic output value of China's fisheries industry exceeded RMB 3 trillion in 2022, approximately USD 459 billion. In 2022, the combined value of coastal aquaculture and fishing output in China was RMB 603.3 billion USD and 90 billion. China has over 16.19 million people engaged in fishing and related activities. The country also hosts 73,000 Japanese restaurants, contributing to a market worth around RMB 180 billion, with an annual turnover exceeding US 220 billion. The Chinese Communist Party is using its significant economic interests, worth over US 100 billion, and the livelihoods of millions of fishermen to put pressure on Japan's aquaculture industry, which has an export value of around USD 600 million. On the night of August 24th, the first signs of the impact of Japan's nuclear wastewater discharge became evident. Many Chinese fishermen faced a barrage of harsh comments in their live streams, leading some to break down and shed tears. These fishermen were faced with questions like, "Are we still going to be able to work? And I'm just a salesperson. I didn't come here to argue." The demand for seafood was so high that their stocks vanished within an hour. Despite their assurances of quality, some were left unconvinced. Wholesale seafood markets across the country witnessed a significant drop in business since August 24th. Many seafood-related businesses were affected, and there was a noticeable decline in sales. Japanese restaurants, seafood establishments, the fishing industry, and associated businesses, including beach tourism, were all severely impacted. Japanese restaurants were particularly affected, as some had to admit that their ingredients were not imported from Japan. Business owners in the seafood industry, such as restaurant owners and fishermen, faced hardships. Discounts and promotions in the seafood market didn't help much as consumers became increasingly reluctant to purchase seafood. The discharge of nuclear-contaminated water from Japan had a profound effect on China's catering industry, particularly seafood restaurants. People were anxious, and this led to a significant drop in seafood consumption. The situation raised concerns about the future of the seafood industry and its related businesses. The turmoil had a visible impact on businesses, with restaurants nearly empty compared to their usual bustling state. Seafood, which was once a popular choice, was no longer considered edible by the public. Many feared the consequences of consuming contaminated seafood, and this sentiment was likely to persist for years. In this environment, the seafood industry, along with tourism and related sectors, faced a bleak outlook. People who relied on the sea for their livelihood, such as fishermen and those in the seafood supply chain, were hit hard. It was challenging for these workers to transition to other professions, and their struggles should not be underestimated. While some expressed concern about their future, others understood the gravity of the situation. China, known for its pollution issues in food, air, and water, faced yet another environmental concern. Despite these challenges, some individuals recognized the need to discern information critically and expressed their worries about the impact of the situation on their lives and industries. China has a significant number of nuclear power plants situated along its coastline. Disturbingly, reports indicate that the radiation levels in the discharges from these plants are substantially higher, 6 to 10 times, than those from Japan's nuclear wastewater. Additionally, there have been incidents of environmental pollution. In one instance, a substantial amount of unidentified black water has been observed rushing into the sea near a seaside bathing area in Dalian. Similarly, pipes have been discovered discharging sewage in Shandong province, with this waste quietly making its way to the ocean floor. When the tide recedes, these sewage pipes and the black sewage are exposed, revealing a disturbing reality. This issue appears to extend along the coastlines, adding to the concern. The visible evidence shows that the water in the East China Sea has been contaminated, although what's been exposed represents only a fraction of the overall problem. It's important to note that this is not an isolated incident in China. Previous reports have indicated that a staggering 80% of China's groundwater is undrinkable due to pollution. Despite these severe environmental challenges, some Chinese citizens have seemingly remained relatively calm amid the recent propaganda efforts by the Chinese Communist Party (CP). This contrasting response highlights the complex interplay between public perception, official messaging, and the pressing environmental issues China faces. How does our nuclear power plant handle its water, and what rules does it follow? When it comes to Japan's water, they deal with it where they live, so it's their responsibility. They eat more fish than the Chinese, so if they have problems, it's their concern. Surprisingly, most of Hong Kong's food, about 70 to 80%, comes from Japan, not China, and it's mostly agricultural products. One time, a milkman said that the milk we export is not polluted, including what goes to Hong Kong. The point here is that people often pollute in places away from their homes and don't worry about their own health. We should focus on our pollution problems rather than checking if others meet standards. Look at the air, river water, and soil in China. Even local farmers don't eat their own produce, so why worry about others' problems? Some statistics suggest that many Chinese are more familiar with events in the US and Japan than their own issues, showing a tendency to neglect their own problems while fixating on small issues elsewhere. In the end, it's not about caring for others' environmental problems, but they seek a sense of existence, and that's why Gorbachev, the last leader of the Soviet Union, once said that we tend to criticize others openly, praise ourselves excessively, and avoid hearing the truth from others. Lin Yutong, a well-known Chinese scholar, had an interesting perspective on the Chinese people. He said that they are brave when there is peace, but become fearful in times of danger. They appear strong when surrounded by weaker individuals and become fierce and hostile when dealing with kind people. Surprisingly, they often remain silent when confronted with evil. Looking at the bigger picture, we can better understand the mindset of China's Communist Party CPU. On August 18th, the US, Japan, and South Korea had a summit meeting at Camp David. This can be seen as a step towards creating a tighter alliance, similar to a smaller version of NATO, as these three countries collaborate more closely in military and geopolitical matters. They could attract other nations in Southeast Asia and the South Pacific, like Australia, to align with them. Japan would also increase its influence, especially by addressing the nuclear wastewater issue and restricting imports of Japanese seafood products. The CCP's response appears to be aimed at countering this emerging alliance of the three nations, but it often ends up hurting the Chinese people more than its intended targets, such as Japan, instead of causing harm to Japan. The Chinese government's actions negatively impact China's aquaculture, fishing industries, Japanese restaurants, and seafood catering services. This highlights the Chinese people's vulnerability when information is controlled, but it also raises questions about the wisdom of the CCP's decision. And that is today's episode. If you found this video informative, please subscribe and ring a bell to get notification. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.